Begin the Gemara on the bottom of Daf Samach Beis Amud Beis, 4 lines from the bottom. Amar Avina. This is a continuation to the Gemara before, where it speaks about the halacha of shchutei chutz, the isser of shchutei chutz, applying it to the two seirim that are brought in Yom Kippur. And the halacha that was said here in Abraisa is that if you had the two seirim that you were makdish before the geiralos were done, so you didn't yet designate one for Lashem and one for Lazazel. If either of them was slaughtered outside the Beis HaMikdash, like shchutei chutz, then it's going to be aser. Ya'iv the iser. And the explanation the Gemara gave is, even though it's not yet fit to be brought as a carbon inside, it wasn't designated yet. You only chayav for shchutei chutz if it's fit to be brought for a carbon inside this way. The answer is, it's not fit to be brought for the carbon Lashem, for the chatas, for Yom Kippur. It wasn't designated for that yet. But both seirim could be brought as a musaf of Yom Kippur, which is also from a sa'ir. And therefore it's considered to be fit for a carbon inside. And Rav Chisda here explains that the fact that the geidel wasn't done yet, so therefore there's something lacking here. There's something missing with this animal as far as it being fit for being brought as the carbon for Yom Kippur. Even though there's nothing lacking with the actual body of the animal, but the geidel is lacking. So therefore it's not considered to be fit to be brought as the carbon Lashem. But for the musaf, there's nothing really lacking. It's just a matter of time. You have to get other karbanis done, and then later in the day, it could be brought as a musaf. And therefore, it's considered to be already at this point fit for that carbon. So that's the continuation. Based on this, Ravina is going to learn out another halacha. Amar Ravina hashted Amar Rav Chisda. So now that Rav Chisda said, Mechusar hagrala, if you have these seirim that are lacking still the geidel being made for them, and therefore k'mechusar ma'aseh dami, it's like it's lacking an action to be done for them, and therefore as far as the carbon being used for Lashem, for the Yom Kippur carbon, it's not considered to be fit as brought as a carbon yet. And therefore, as far as that is concerned, you wouldn't be chayav for shchutei chutz. The only reason is because it can be brought as a carbon musaf. So if so, Rav Yudah Mashmuel, this that Rav Yudah Mashmuel said, Shlomim sheshachtan kaidim sheniftachu dalses ha'heichal, Shlomim that were shechted before the doors of the heichal were opened in the morning. So psulin, a carbon like this is pasul. And the source for it is, how do we know that the doors of the heichal have to be open when the carbon shlomim is shechted? Shenema v'shachatay pesach hayal mayid, and we learn from this, bizman shu pasuach. The carbon is shechted when the doors of the heichal are open. V'loy bizman shehu nahul, and not when they are closed. So now if so, based on what Rav Chisda said before, Shachtan b'chutz, if you shechter a carbon shlomim outside of the Beis HaMikdash, kaidim sheniftachu dalses ha'heichal, before the doors of the heichal were open, pater, he'll also be pater. Why? My time, mechuser psiche, the fact that the doors are not open yet, k'mechuser ma'aseh dami. It's like an action that's required for this carbon to be fit to be brought is lacking. So therefore this is not a carbon fit to be brought inside that you're shechting outside. So the comparison here is just like regarding the seirim on Yom Kippur, we say that if it's lacking the geidel, so then there's something lacking here, and therefore it would not be chayav for shchutei chutz for being a sar for Yom Kippur. There's something missing here. The same thing regarding this requirement of opening the door, even though both the geidel and opening the door is not something lacking in the body of the animal, but nevertheless it's mechusar ma'aseh, and therefore if it's brought outside, you're not going to be chayav for shchutei chutz. Now the Gemara goes back to what we learned before, that why would you be chayav for shchutei chutz when you were makdish the two seirim on Yom Kippur even before you made the geidel? Because if it's not going to be used for what it was intended for, they make the geidel and use it for the Yom Kippur carbon, it can be used for the musaf carbon of Yom Kippur, and therefore it is already considered to be fit for a carbon. Now the question on this the Gemara asks, Umi islay Rav Chisda hoyel. Does Rav Chisda hold of this concept of hoyel, that a carbon that you were makdish for one purpose, over here for the special carbonis of Lashem and Lazazel, and now it could also be used for another carbon, and just because of that, you would be chayav for shchutei chutz. Does Rav Chisda hold of this? For Rav Chisda, what Rav Chisda said, Pesach sheshachtei b'chutz b'shar yimei sashana, a carbon Pesach that was shechted outside of the Beis HaMikdash and any other day of the year, not on Erev Pesach. So l'shmai, if you shechted it l'shem Pesach, potter. You'll be potter because it's not roy to be brought as a Pesach on any day of the year. So therefore you're not chayiv for it when you shecht it outside either. Shalai Lishmai, but if you shechted Shalai Lishma, in other words, you shechted for a shlamim, then chayiv. Then you will be chayiv because this is a carbon that's actually right to be brought as a shlamim. That's what happens to a Pesach any other day of the year. If you bring it as a shlamim, so then it's a shlamim. So if you shecht it outside this way, so then you'll be chayiv for a shlamim. So the Gemara now says, what do you see from Rab Chisda here? Taime the Shalai Lishmai. The only reason you'd be chayiv with this carbon Pesach any day of the year because you shechted it specifically for a shlamim. Hastame, but if you shechted it outside of the Beis HaMikdash with an unspecified kavana. Lishmaihu, I consider it to be a carbon Pesach, upater, and it's going to be pater. It's not considered to be a carbon fit to be brought inside that you'd be chayiv for outside. The question is, v'amai, but why? Leime, according to the rule that Rav Chisda said before, I should say here as well, hoyel v'roi shaloi l'shmai bifnim, since this is fit to be brought, this carbon Pesach is fit to be brought, shaloi l'shmai, in other words, for a shlamim in the Beis HaMikdash, over here. So therefore, if you bring it outside, stam, without any specified thought, you should be chayiv for shchuti chutz, since this is a carbon that could have been brought inside as a shlamim. Just like we said before regarding the seirim, since it could be brought as a musaf, so therefore you're chayiv when you shecht it outside. So the Gemara answers, it's not the same thing. Hachi ashta, there's no comparison here. Hasam, by the carbon Pesach, it's been already designated for a Pesach, and over here the halacha is boy akira. In order to change it from being a Pesach to a shlamim, you have to intentionally uproot it. Meaning, if you're actually having a clear specified kavana for shlamim, then it gets uprooted from being a Pesach to a shlamim. So therefore, if you're just shechting it stam, it's going to be considered a carbon Pesach. And if you shecht it outside, it wasn't right to be brought inside, it's still a Pesach, so you're going to be pater. Hi, but over here with these seirim on Yom Kippur, loy boy akira. If it's not going to be used for what it was intended for, to be brought for the carbon chatos la'Hashem, but it's going to be brought as a carbon musaf, that's also a chatos. Over here, you don't have to uproot it from one kind of carbon to a different kind of carbon, like by a Pesach to a shlamim. Here, either way, it's going to be a chatos. So therefore, the fact that it could be brought as a chatos for the musaf is enough that it's fit as a carbon, and you'll be chayiv for shchutei chutz. Rabbe Bashimi Masni Lohu B'Derabbe. Rabbe Bashimi said the statement before, this halacha of hoyel, since it could be brought as a musaf in the name of Rabbe, not in the name of Rav Chisda. The Kashile, the Rabbe, and then he had the same question over here in the second statement. He also had this in the name of Rabbe regarding the carbon Pesach. Umishani Kedeshaninan. And he gave the same answer as we just had answered. Now the Gemara is going to bring another two opinions regarding the carbon Pesach being shechted b'shar Yemais Hashana on the outside. He said in the name of Rabbi Yechanan, Pesach, sheshachte b'chutz b'shar Yemais Hashana. A Pesach shechted outside of the Beis HaMikdash on any other day of the year. Bein l'shmai, whether it was shechted for its sake, for the Pesach. Bein shaloi l'shmai, whether it was shechted shaloi l'shma, meaning for a shlamim. Potter. Either way, you're going to be potter for the isser of shchutei chutz. What's the explanation of this? So, Amar Avdimi, Amrita l'shmaite kameh Rav Yirmiyah. I said this halacha in the name of Rav Yechanan and from Rav Yirmiyah, and the question was asked, B'shleima l'shmai. So we understand why if you shech this carbon Pesach any other day of the year for a carbon Pesach, so there's no isra of shchutei chutz, the halech hazile, because it's not fit on any day to be brought as a carbon Pesach. Elo shaloi l'shmai, but if you shecht it outside, shaloi l'shma, you shecht it as a shlamim, amai, why would you be potter? Hachazi shaloi l'shmai, bifnim. This is what you could bring a carbon Pesach for inside the Beis HaMikdash any day of the year as a shlamim. Va'amali, and Rabbi Yirmiyah explained me, akiras chutz lav shma akira. Rabbi Yechanan held, when you have this kavana to uproot it from being a Pesach to being a shlamim, but where did you have this kavana? When you brought it outside of the Beis HaMikdash as shchutei chutz, that akira is not effective at all. This whole halacha that the Torah says that you can take a Pesach and have a kavana of shlamim and uproot it of being a Pesach to a shlamim is a special concept that's learned from a pasuk, and that's only possible and effective if it's done in the proper way inside. But if it's done on the outside, in a place where the carbon is not supposed to be brought, your kavanah to turn it into a shlamim didn't work b'chlal. So therefore, it remains a carbon Pesach being brought on any day of the year outside. It's not fit to be brought that way inside, so you're not chayiv for shchutei chutz. The Gemara brings another opinion that was reported in the name of Rabbi Yechanan. Ki asa Ravin Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah Amar Rabbi Yechanan Pesach sheshachte b'chutz b'shar Yemais Hashana. A carbon Pesach shechted outside on any day of the year. bein lishmai, bein shaloi lishmai, whether it was shechted for its sake or for the sake of a shlamim. Chayiv, either way, you would be chayiv for shechting it outside for the isar shchuti chutz. So the Gemara asks, why is this so? Vafilu lishmai, even if you shechted it outside for the sake of a Pesach, so it's not fit to be brought inside this way, you'll still be chayiv for shchuti chutz. Why? So presumably the reason is because it could have been brought as a shlamim. If you would have brought it inside as a shlamim, with the kavan of shlamim, it would have been good. But is that enough of a reason to be mechayev when you bring it outside for shchutei chutz? And the Gemara brings a Mishnah where we see that it's not, because what's nan? We learned in the Mishnah regarding shchutei chutz, mechus is man. When you have a carbon that's before its time, bein begufay, whether as far as the body of the animal itself, it's before the time, before the age it could be brought, which is only after 8 days old, as the pasuk says, bein bebailim, or whether it lacks its time because of the owner. And the Gemara explains right now what that means. The Mishnah that explains. What does it mean that it's lacking the time needed for it to be brought as a carbon? When the owner, it's lacking as far as the owner is concerned. So these people that have to bring karbonis, so they have a certain period of time, 7 days usually, that they have to wait before they bring a carbon. So if they brought their carbon chatas and osham on the outside before its time, piturin, they're going to be potter, because this is not yet a carbon that's fit to be brought inside, so you potter if you bring it outside. If they brought their carbon oila or shlamim on the outside, and Rashi explains that the carbon oila and shlamim, so the carbon oila is brought by them as well, by these individuals here that we mentioned, and the shlamim is brought by a nazir. So even though we didn't have nazir here before, but the Gemara in Zvachim says that you have to add a nazir in here, and he brings a carbon shlamim. So the carbon ayla shlamim that was brought outside before its time, before 7 days, chayavin. For that you will be chayav. So what's the reason for the difference? So as Rashi explains, a carbon chatas and asham could only be brought as a chatas or an asham. A carbon oila and a shlamim, it could also be brought as an adava, not as a oila and a shlamim. So even though it's not its time yet to be brought, but if you're going to just bring it as an adava, it could be brought that way. So therefore, this is a carbon that's already fit to be brought as a carbon even before the 7 days. That's the explanation of the difference. Now on this, V'omer Rav Chilkiah bar Tuvi, Rav Chilkiah bar Tuvi explained regarding the chatas and the yasham, that lo yishanu elo lishmai. This, that we said that if it was brought on the outside before its time, before the 7 days that the owners have to bring it, that you'd be potter if it was shechter as a chatas and an asham. Avol shaloi lishmai, if you did not bring it for the sake of a chatas or an asham, you brought it for the sake of a different carbon, so then chayiv, you will be chayiv. And as Rashi explains, the reason is, this is the general rule regarding all karbonis that we had not long ago. And it says in the beginning of Masechtes Zvachim, any carbon that was shechted shaloi lishma. So actually this is by the osham, by the chatas, this rule does not apply. So Rav Chilki's rule over here refers to the osham, that if it's shechted shaloi lishma, so then for the owner that had to bring the carbon, he wasn't yaitze his chiyuv. He's going to have to bring a different carbon. But the actual carbon itself will be kosher. So if this asham was brought with l'shem oila, so then it'll be kosher as an oila. So therefore, if it was shechted shaloi lishma, so it could be brought as an adava, as an oila shaloi lishma, and therefore, or not as an adava, but as an oila, then it becomes an oila, and therefore you'd be chayiv if you shechted on the outside as well. That's what Rav Chilkiah bar Tuvi said. So in the Braisa, when it said chatasam v'ashamam b'chutz, it's only if it was shecht l'shem asham. So the Gemara now says, what do we understand from this? L'shmai, but by the chatas and the asham, if it was shechted l'shmai, as a chatas as an asham, mie potter, you would be potter. So the question is, but amai, why should you be potter? Name, why shouldn't we say, hayel v'ru'uyin shaloi l'shmai b'fnim? So just Rav Chilkiah bar Tuvi just said that this carbon, if it's brought shaloi l'shma, then the carbon itself is kosher. And therefore, if you shech the shaloi l'shma outside, it's going to be aser, because of shchutei chutz. So let's say the same thing, even if it was shechted l'shma, let's apply the concept of hayel, that this carbon, since it could have been brought shaloi l'shma, that therefore it should be chayav for shchutei chutz as well. So what do you see from here? That this is a Mishnah that tells us that we don't apply this concept of Hoyel in this case. So if so, how did Rabbi Yechanan say before that if you shechted a carbon Pesach on any day of the year, l'shem Pesach, that you'd be chayiv a shchutei chutz? So what would be the reason? Because it could have been shechted as a shlamim. But we see right over here regarding the asham, I don't say that since it could have been shechted shalei l'shma, therefore you would be chayiv when you shechted it l'shem chatas or asham. So the same thing by a Pesach. If you shecht it l'shem Pesach, and it's not fit to be brought that way, you shouldn't be chayiv because it could have been shechted l'shem shlamim. So the Gemara here answers, no, it's not the same thing. This Mishnah is not a raya. Hachi ashta, what's the comparison? Hasam, when it comes to the chatas and the asham, boy akira. If you want to shecht it shaloi l'shma, and then it'll be kosher shaloi l'shma, you have to have that in mind intentionally and specifically to uproot it from being a asham. That's over there. But hacha, by the Pesach, and here the Gemara is going to bring a different opinion than what we had before. Pesach, b'sharya ma'isa shana, shlamim ninu. A carbon Pesach on any other day of the year, automatically when you shecht it, it's going to be a shlamim. You don't have to have a special kavanah to uproot it from its status of being a Pesach. So before, when the Gemara was explaining Rav Chisda's opinion, it said that according to Rav Chisda, a Pesach on any other day of the year, you do have to have a specific kavanah to uproot it from being a Pesach and to become a shlamim. But now the Gemara is saying, according to this version of Rabbi Yechanan's opinion, that a carbon Pesach on any day of the year, automatically it's going to become a shlamim if you shecht it. So therefore, if you shechted a carbon Pesach any day of the year outside, even if it was shechted l'shma, you're going to be chayiv for shchutei chutz, because this is a carbon that automatically it would be roi to become a shlamim. Gemara now says, Rav Ashi masni chayiv kedamaran. Rav Ashi also learned, like this version here that we had in the name of Rabbi Yechanan, that when you shecht the carbon Pesach, whether l'shma, whether shaloi l'shma, on the outside, you'd be chayiv for it kedamrinan, as we said. Rav Yirmiyah Medifti masni potter. Rav Yirmiyah Medifti learned that in either way, if you shechter a carbon Pesach, l'shma or shaloi l'shma, you're going to be potter. So even if you shechter a shaloi l'shma, l'shem shlamim that is, which is the way it's fit to be brought every day of the year, and you shechter it outside, you're still going to be potter. So the Gemara explains that. Why? Because he holds Pesach b'shaya ma'isa shana boi akira. He holds like the opinion that we said before, that the Pesach, in order to change it into a shlamim every day of the year, it doesn't happen automatically. You have to have a specific kavanah to uproot from being a Pesach to being a shlamim. And additionally, he holds v'akiras chutz lav shma akira. Uprooting it outside, having this kavanah when you shecht it and apostle away outside, it's ineffective. This kayach to change a Pesach to a shlamim is only inside, not outside. Well, Pliga that Rav Chilki bar Tuvi, this argues in Rav Chilki bar Tuvi that said that when you shech the asham outside shaloi l'shma, then it becomes a different carbon. You could uproot it even on the outside. So he argues on what Rav Chilki bar Tuvi said, and therefore the carbon Pesach shechted any other day of the year, whether l'shma, whether shaloi l'shma, you're going to be potter because this was not fit to be brought as a carbon on the inside. So we had over here three different opinions regarding the carbon Pesach and the halacha of shchutei chutz. The first opinion was, Rav Chisda's opinion was, that only if it was shechted shaloi l'shma, are you going to be chayiv? If it was shechted l'shma, you're going to be potter. Then there was Rav Dimi in the name of Rav Yechanan that said that if you shecht it outside, either way it's going to be potter. And Ravin in the name of Rav Yechanan said that a carbon Pesach that was shechted outside every day of the year, whether l'shma, whether shaloi l'shma, it'll always be chayiv. Now the Gemara goes back to the halacha that we were learning before about the shchutei chutz, regarding the Se'irim on Yom Kippur. So we learned before, so you have these shchutei chutz, these Se'irim that were designated, and now the Geidel was done already. So then, chayiv al shalshem. So if you took the one that was designated to be Lashem for the chatos, and you shechted it outside, so for that you chayiv. But upater al shel azazel. But if you took the one designated to go to the azazel, and you shechted it outside, you pater for the isser of shchutei chutz. So the Gemara will bring a braise that will bring us the source for this halacha. Tana Rabbanan, we learned in the braise. It says in the pasuk by the Isser of shchutei chutz, ish mi beis Yisrael asher yishchat shoyer kesev v'yeis b'machana. You shechted it outside of the Beis Hamikdash in the camp, or asher yishchat michutz lamachna, or even outside the camp. Vel Pesach el mayed le'eviyai lahakriv carbon lashem. It wasn't brought to the opening of the oil mayed to bring the carbon for the Eivishka. So there's a lot of details that are mentioned here in this pasuk. So now, the Braise here says, carbon. If it would say only the word carbon, so it sort of sounds like we're in the middle of a subject. Rashi here says that the beginning of the Braise says that I would think that just like there's an Isser to bring karbonis outside, and there is an issa kadis for that, maybe the reverse should also be brought. True, that is. That chulin that's brought into the azara should have the same issa. Chulin is also supposed to be only on the outside, and it's being brought in the wrong place inside, the issa should also apply. So for that, the Braisa says, no, it says in the Torah the issa is for a carbon. That only for a carbon you chayav kadis, but not chulin that's brought on the inside. But now the Braisa says, carbon. Now, the fact that it says this word carbon, maybe I should be mimayit something else. Shemeya ni, I would think to say that what does carbon include? Afilakoche bedek habayis. Carbon is not only something that's actually designated to be brought on as a carbon on the mizbeach. Maybe this includes also bedek habayis, any animals that were designated to kachim for the bedek habayis, which only has a monetary kedusha on it. Shenikru carbon, and they're also considered to be a carbon. They have this name carbon. Ke'inyan shenema, like in a pasuk where it says v'nikrav as carbon Hashem, that we brought the carbon to the Eibishter. And this is a pasuk where it's talking about all the loot and everything that they had over there by the Mulchama of Midian. It's talking there about Zov and all kinds of jewelry that they got, and it refers to it as a carbon. So maybe when it says here carbon, it's even talking about an animal that you were makdish for the bedek habayis, and it was brought outside, that you should be chayiv for that as well. Talmud Loimar, so therefore the pasuk says, Vel Pesach Oil Moed. No, that's not what carbon is including, because it says that it was not brought to the Pesach Oil Moed, inside the Azara. Lo Yevi, it wasn't brought there, which means, Kol Aroi Pesach Oil Moed, Chayiv Olav, Bachutz, only our actual carbon that's brought in the Pesach Oil Moed, that's what you chayiv for if you shechted it outside. Kol She'ein Aroi Pesach Oil Moed, if it's not fit to be brought into the Oil Moed as a carbon, it's just bedek habayis, then ein chayav and olav bachutz. You're not chayiv if you bring this carbon outside. If so, the Braisa continues and says, so I exclude those that are not fit to be brought Pesach Oil Moed. But maybe I should not exclude paras chatos, v'soyer ha-mishtaleach. I should not exclude the para aduma, or the Soyer HaMishtaleach, Shehu Ro'ir Lavoi Al Pesach Oil Moed, which are fit, they are fit to be brought into the Oil Moed. So the Soyer HaMishtaleach, we understand that it's brought into the Oil Moed. You make the geidel inside the Azara, Pesach Oil Moed that is, you make the geidel in the Azara with the Lashem and La Zazel. The Paras Chatas, Rashi actually says that you're not geidus this because the Paraduma is not brought into the Oil Moed. It's done outside, and the blood is sprayed towards the Beis HaMikdash, but it's not brought inside at all. But others are guided it because it's a specific designated spot where it's brought outside and it's sprayed towards the Beis HaMikdash. So therefore, others are guided the Paras Chatas over here. So I would think, so let's focus on Soyer HaMishtaleach. I would think that Soyer HaMishtaleach is also included in this Isser of Shchutei Chutz, because it's brought into the Azara. Talmud Loimar Lashem. So therefore the pasuk says La Hashem, Mishim Yechadim Lashem, only karbonis that are going to be brought and shechted for the Eibishter and sprayed on the Mizbeach. That's what you over on Shchutei Chutz for. Yatsu Eilu, which excludes these, She'ein Miyechadim Lashem. The carbon, the Sar sent La Zazel is not considered to be La Hashem, it's La Zazel, and therefore there's no Issa of Shchutei Chutz. So this is the source for what we said before, that the one that's for Azazel is no Issa of Shchutei Chutz. But now the Gemara questions the source here. V'la Hashem lo hoitzihu, when the Torah writes La Hashem, this is an exclusion. It's coming to exclude the Soyer HaMishtaleach. But I'll ask you a question from another case where you see that La Hashem is actually coming to include that is. It's coming to include the Soyer HaMishtaleach. The pasuk says, Yeratze lakarbon isha La Hashem, that it'll be brought as a carbon, it'll be accepted as a carbon for the Eibishter. This is the pasuk that's talking about the requirement of the animal being 8 days old to be brought as a carbon. So what does this include? What does this requirement refer to? So, Eilu Ishim. This refers to the carbon is brought on the fire of the Mizbeach. Minayin shelo yaktishenu mechus zman. So how do I know that it's not only that it shouldn't be brought on the fire, but it's also you shouldn't even designate it as a carbon, you shouldn't be makdish it as a carbon if it's not yet 8 days old. Talmud Loimar, so therefore the pasuk here says carbon. That you shouldn't carbon Lashem. Carbon, that is. So it says carbon to tell me that even to designate it, to be makdish it as a carbon, you also shouldn't do it before it's 8 days old. Lashem, then when the pasuk says Lashem, L'rabbis Soyer HaMishtaleach. it's coming to add, this extra word is coming to add, even the Soira Mishtaleach, that it's also included in this requirement that has to be 8 days old. So here we see that Lashem is including, not excluding the Soira Mishtaleach. Amar Rava answers, it depends on the context. Hasam men yana dekra, v'hacha men yana dekra. Over there we go with the context of the pasuk, and here we follow the context of the pasuk. Hasam, by the case of the halacha of the shchutei chutz, I say Del Pesach l'Rabbis. When the Torah wrote El Pesach, so that would include even the Soira Mishtalech that's brought into the Yazareh. So therefore, when the Torah writes the extra word Lashem, so it's Lahaitzi. So it's an extra word. What is it coming to say? To exclude something. So because before we were marba everything, so Lashem here is an exclusion. But then over here, Hacha, the Isha, Lahaitzi, when the Pasuk says Isha, only was brought on the fire of the Mizbeach, so that we understand that the Soira Mishtalech is excluded from that. So now, when it says Lashem, L'Rabbis, when the Torah writes Lashem, that is coming to add and say that even though before it seemed like we were excluding this, but nevertheless this is also included. So it depends on the context of the Pasuk. Now the Gemara says, Taime the Rabbi Rachmane, the only reason why I say that the Soira Mishtaleach is going to be included in this requirement to be 8 days old is because I have the special pasuk of Lashem. Haloi Rabbi, if I wouldn't have this special pasuk, so then Hava Min, I would say Soira Mishtaleach Kadosh b'Mechuses Man, that the Soira Mishtaleach could be designated even if it's not 8 days old. So the Gemara asks him this, how is this possible? When you designate the 2 seirim and then you're going to make a geidel, you have to designate 2 seirim where either one is fit to be brought LaHashem. You don't know which one is going to be LaHashem. So how could you say that you're going to designate one for Soir LaZazel even before 8 days old? It's before the geidel, so and it's only going to the geidel will only take effect if both of them are fit to be Lashem, and then the geidel will determine which one will be Lashem. So we have a few answers here. Rav Yosef attempts to give an answer. Homani, who is this Braisa going according to? Chanan HaMitzri. It goes according to Chanan HaMitzri. The Tanya, Chanan HaMitzri Yomer, Chanan HaMitzri said, Afil dam bekois, even after you shechted that carbon of the Lashem, and you have already the blood in the kais, and then what happened? The carbon, the Soira Mishtaleach died. Maybe Chaveira, you can bring another Soira Mishtaleach, and you add it to this one that was already shechted Lashem. In other words, you don't have to take the carbon that's shechted Lashem and throw it all out and start all over again, both with the Lashem and the Lazazel. You can keep the one Lashem that was already shechted there, and if the Soira Mishtaleach died, so you'll just bring another one for the Soira Lazazel. So therefore, this will be the case where it's necessary to have a pasuk to say that the Soira Mishtaleach has to be 8 days old, because here you're bringing the Soira Mishtaleach separately, not together with the Soira Lashem, and you don't know which is going to go Lashem Lazazel. So in this case, when you know you're being Makdashit Lazazel, I need a special pasuk to say that has to be 8 days old. But the Gemara says, no, Chanan HaMitzri is not a good source for this. What do we see here that Chanan HaMitzri said? The Lesley Dechuyin. He doesn't agree to Dechuyin, meaning that we should push off this carbon Lashem that was already shechted and the blood is already in a kais. We don't passel that because the other Soir, the Soir Lazazel, died. Like the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah said both of these karbanos are tied to one another. If the Soir Lazazel dies, so the Soir Lashem is also being passel now. And you have to start over and you have to bring both over again, the Lashem and the Lazazel. So we see that Chanan HaMitzri certainly disagrees with that. That the Soir Lazazel dies, the Soir Lashem is still good. That we see, yes. But the Lesley Agrale Mishametle. From where do I see in the words of Chanan HaMitzri that when you're bringing now a new Soir Lazazel, that he would hold that you're not going to have to make a new geidel for this Soir Lazazel? Maybe he holds that when you're going to bring this new Soir Lazazel, you have to bring 2 seirim and make a geidel to determine which one's Lashem, which one's Lazazel. The one that's Lazazel will go Lazazel, and the one that's Lashem is extra because the other one is still good, and you'll just let it graze and get a mum, and then as we said, you bring the money for it as a carbon nedava. But maybe you do have to make a geidel over again for the second Soir Lazazel that you're bringing. So how could you bring this if it's not 8 days old if you're making a geidel for this? Mi shametle dilme maisi umagril. Maybe he also agrees. Maybe Chanan HaMitzri also holds that you have to bring and make a geidel for the second Sar Lazazel. Elam Rav Yosef. So therefore Rav Yosef says, I have a source from another opinion. Hamani Rab Shimoni. The source is Rab Shimon that said this clearly. The Tanya we learned in Abraisa. Meis echad mehen. If one of them died, mevi chaveiroi shaloi bagrola. You bring another one. If the one Lashem died, so you bring one Lashem. Or if the one Lazazel died, you bring the one Lazazel, and you don't have to bring both again from the beginning. And when he says clearly, without any geidel, Rab Shimon, that's Rab Shimon's opinion. So according to Rab Shimon, we need a pasuk to teach me that the one brought Lazazel has to be 8 days old. Ravina gives a different answer. The case over here is Shohumam v'chiluloi alacher. What happened is this carbon that was this sawyer that's designated Lazazel got a mum, and because it got a mum, he deconsecrated it and he designated another one to be in its place. And in such a case, when you're transferring from this one that got a mum to another one, you don't have to make a new geidel again, because it's coming from this one that you already made the kedusha. That kedusha from the one that the geidel was made on it is being transferred over. So when this is the case where he's telling you, where you need the pasuk to tell you the requirement that it has to be 8 days old, you're just bringing the Sar Lazazel separately. But now the Gemara interjects and asks, wait a minute, do we not tamer the pasuk be mumah? How do we know that a mum will passel a Sar Lazazel? We know a mum passels a carbon, but how do we know it passels the Sar Lazazel? The Tanya, because we learned in Abraisa, v'isha leisitnu mehem, you shouldn't bring from a carbon that's a bal mum on the mizbeach and the fire. Elo achalovim, the fats are not allowed to be brought in the mizbeach. Ein li'ela kulon, I would say it's only if you bring all the fats in the mizbeach. Miktsas minayim, from where do I know that you're not allowed to even bring part of them on the mizbeach? Talmud leimar mehem, even from them you shouldn't bring on the mizbeach. Then the pasuk says, mizbeach zuzrikas damim, that if it has a balmum, it's a balmum, you're not allowed to spray the blood from this on the mizbeach. And then when the pasuk says Lashem l'rabbis soir amishtaleyach, this tells me that even for the soir amishtaleyach, it also cannot be a balmum. Now the Gemara says, so we had 2 psukim of Lashem to say to include a soir amishtaleyach. One regarding the requirement of it being 8 days old, and another one regarding the requirement of it not being a balmum. Why do I need both? Couldn't I learn out one from another? I need to teach me both of these. Why? They're not the same. If the Torah would say that there is the requirement of the right time, 8 days old, by a Sar Mishtaleach, the reason is because this is a very strong psul. The time of it being fit for a carbon hasn't even arrived yet. But if it's a Baal Mum, where the time has already arrived for it, and then it has a blemish, it's not as much as a psul. So maybe I would say that this kind of a requirement is not applicable by a Sar Mishtaleach. In the reverse, I could also say, if it would only say the requirement of it not being a Baal Mum mishum demois, because a blemish is disgusting. It's a blemish in the body of the animal. And therefore that's something that's required even by the Sar Mishtaleach. Av mechusas man, if it's just lacking the age and the 8 days, the loy mois, it's not disgusting. I would say maybe that doesn't apply for the Sar Mishtaleach. Therefore tzricha, the Torah teaches me twice Lashem that both of these requirements of mechusas man and balmum apply to a Sar Mishtaleach as well. The Gemara brings a third answer to our question. Why do we need a pasuk to say by the Sar Mishtaleach that it has to be 8 days old if it's anyways being brought together with the Sar Lashem before the Geidel? So therefore, of course, it has to be 8 days old. Rava says the pasuk saying that you can't bring it mechusas man is a completely different case. Nothing to do with the requirement of being 8 days old. Rather, what is it? Kagain, the case is person had a person that's sick in his house on Yom Kippur, and therefore he was allowed to shecht a shecht to have meat for this person that needs to eat. V'shachat imoi b'yayim HaKippurim. The mother of this carbon that's designated here for the Azazel was shechted for this individual. So now what's the halacha? There's the halacha of not shechting the mother and the child for a carbon on the same day. So now once the mother was shechted today, so you can't shecht the child either. So this is what happened over here on Yom Kippur. And therefore, this is called mechusas man. And this is the kind of mechusas man that we're talking about. So really, yes, the geidel was already done. We're not talking about the sar that's being brought and before the Geidel was done over here, and it's telling me that Mechusas Zman, it can't be brought as the Geidel was already done. And then after the fact, what happened? The mother of this Sar Lazazel was shechted for this person to be able to feed him, and now the question is, it's Mechusas Zman. I can't bring it for the Sar Mishtaleach. So therefore, that's what I need the pasuk to say, that the Isser of Mechusas Zman applies here. But the Gemara asks, wait a minute, what's the issue to take it to the Azazel? You're not going to be shechting it. Over here, to take this after you already shechted its mother for someone to eat, would it be aser to throw it down the cliff by the Azazel? The Torah says that when you shechted the mother, you can't shecht the child. But when you are taking it down la Azazel, there's no shchiti here, you're just throwing it off the cliff. So it was said in Eretz Yisrael, pushing it down, the mountain, the cliff, zu hishchitasai. This is the shchita of this Sar La'azazel. And therefore the Isser of not shechting it and the mother on the same day applies over here. And therefore this is the Mechusas Zman that we were talking about when we brought the pasuk to say that it applies even to the Sar HaMishtaleach. So the obvious question that the Sfas Emes brings up over here is, so why do we need a pasuk to say that Mechusas Zman applies to Sar HaMishtaleach? You anyways are not allowed to take it for the Sar La'azazel because of the Isser of Le'istishchatu Oisay V'ezbenoi B'yayim Echad. So it's also for that reason. So he answers, mitzad that Isser, I would say, true, it's Asr, but maybe B'diyevet, if he was over that Isser, the mitzvah of Sar HaMishtaleach he fulfilled. He did an Isser, but this mitzvah of Sar HaMishtaleach is done. So therefore the pasuk is telling me, no, the concept of Mechusas Zman will passel the mitzvah of Sar HaMishtaleach, and if it was done on the same day as the mother was shechted, it's considered to be Mechusas Zman, and therefore even b'diavad, it's going to be passel.